Prime Minister Mark Carney has decided he is basically, through an order in council, trying to render the consumer part of the carbon tax null and void by bringing it to zero. We continue to talk to people in the new government exactly how they will do it, as Colton had said. And as he had mentioned, he was at Pierre Poilievre's press conference earlier today, where he addressed specifically the carbon tax. Have a listen.
This one's going to be very sneaky, very sneaky. I call it the carbon tax con job. I told you this was going to happen, by the way. Don't say I didn't warn you. He's going to hide the consumer carbon tax for 60 days. And if he's reelected, he'll bring it back bigger than ever with no rebate. Let's be clear. He says that the carbon tax he intends to bring in after the election will be a, quote, shadow carbon tax. And we know that he loves carbon taxes because he publicly advised Trudeau over the last 5 years to raise the taxes even more.
So we know it was going to be an election, or Pierre Poilievre wanted it to be an election on the consumer carbon tax. He's going to continue to try and do that as well. Of course, we always love having Nick Nanos, Chief Data Scientist and founder of Nanos Research, talking about those subjects and, of course, how this will all play out. So he joins me right now. You were in this studio all day as well. Nick, thanks.
Yep.
Welcome back. So when you consider what the government has done here, removing it from an order in council, they've brought it down to zero. It's still on the books. How do you think that plays in an election when you consider that Pierre Poilievre desperately wanted that election to be on the carbon tax?
Well, I'm sure Pierre Poilievre's not only disappointed that the Liberals are trying to take the carbon tax off the agenda, but also disappointed that he's not running against Justin Trudeau, right? If you think of the Conservative election strategy, it was based on, you know, the Liberals being in power for a long period of time, Justin Trudeau being a lightning rod and having this ugly carbon tax that not all Canadians dislike, but most Canadians dislike. But you know what, Mike, what's kind of weird is, what are they saying? Mark Carney's sneaky? Like, is that the best that the Conservative war room has? I'm not sure that's a devastating. I'm not sure that's a devastating attack. And to question whether the Liberals will bring it back in, you know, I think if you ask an average Canadian, do politicians sometimes break their promises? They'd say, yeah. Right. You know, whatever they're saying, you know, I think it'd be quite fair to say, you know, can you promise me, you know, that you'll remove the carbon tax and never bring one in, and for, you know, Carney to kind of come back at Pierre Poilievre. So, you know, politicians claiming that other politicians won't keep their promises, I don't think is a winning strategy. And calling someone sneaky is kind of lame. It's kind of like, you know what, it's like our house being on fire and you having a sneaky fireman there with his hose to put out the fire, which is right now the Canadian economy and attacks from Donald Trump.
That's if you believe that Mark Carney is that fireman, which of course the Conservatives are trying to paint him as anything but, and possibly another arsonist, one would think, to go along with that analogy. So you've been doing polling leading up to this. We know where Mark Carney was and how people were feeling about him. When you consider now that he is going to be leading this government into this, how do you think that will play with voters going forward when you consider there is such a short time window between now and when we expect to go to the polls? And I say that because I don't think anybody in this town believes that Parliament is coming back on the 24th. How do you think that this will play with voters now, especially now that Carney is there, he's got his cabinet, and they're starting to sort of, to use an analogy, they're starting to sort of get the feel of him now, a week on from the leadership?
Well, you know, the thing is that the Liberals have had a few good weeks and have been trending up and now statistically tied. It's a horse race between the Conservatives and the Liberals. I think the Liberals are probably going to have one more good week because, you know, until there's an election, because, you know, the thing is, it's basically 36-35. It's a coin toss right now. And the numbers have been trending positively for the Liberals. Their proportion of accessible voters for the Liberals have been going up. The Conservatives have been going down. And, you know, so I think they'll probably have another good week because it's probably going to be a Mark Carney, brace yourselves, Canada, a Mark Carney infomercial, like, right? He's canceled or put a pause on the carbon tax. He's going to go to Europe. You know, in a way, for Mark Carney, I think he's going to have a jam-packed week so that when the election's called, he's going to say, hey, I've only been Prime Minister for 7 days. Look what I did. You know, I put a pause on the carbon tax. I went to Europe and struck some kind of deal, who knows what. And then, you know, come back. He's dealt with the Premier so that he can basically give, I'll call it, a bit of a deposit for Canadians to say, if you like what, you know, has happened in the last week or so, maybe you should be looking at the red team for the next election. And I think it's going to be up to the Conservatives to try to derail what Mark Carney is probably going to try to do over the next week. But it's going to be tough till the election starts.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because they still have an incredible war chest and an opportunity to try and paint Mark Carney in the way that they want to, because he's a bit of a blank canvas for Canadians. Not a lot of people really know a lot about him, even though he was the governor of the Bank of Canada. Not exactly a high-profile job. Bank of Governor for England as well. What do you think that they can do, the Conservatives, to try and regain some of that momentum? I mean, to use a hockey analogy, sometimes when momentum goes one way, it's hard to bring it back. It's not impossible, though. And in an election campaign, you know as well as I do, anything can happen.
Yeah. I think for the Conservatives, you know, part of their strategy is definitely on point. And that strategy has to do with the fact that the Liberals have been in power since 2015, that Mark Carney has embraced many of the policies, that his cabinet, as individuals who've sat around the table and ardently supported the Justin Trudeau government, and that it might be change, but it might not be the change that you want, while the Conservatives are absolutely different and change from the Mark Carney Liberals. So, you know, I think, you know, for the Conservatives, they should stop talking about sneakiness and just keep hammering away that, you know, kind of like looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And, you know, maybe they've grafted Mark Carney on top of the Liberal machine, but that everything underneath looks kind of the same. And for Mark Carney, for him, it's going to be to distance himself, you know, not too far where he kind of repudiates the Liberal Party, but distance himself so that he shows he's his own person, he has a different direction and a different leadership style than what we've seen over the last decade.
How key is that, and the metric that I know that we've spoken about in the past, that available voter pool? Because it was starting to dry up for the Liberals at one point. Now with Mark Carney, it feels like he's starting to eat the Conservatives' lunch a little bit and widening to there. How key is that for the Liberals when you consider they're going a little further to the right on the political spectrum rather than trying to eat the voter pool of the NDP? More available people on the blue side of the ledger in your mind?
Well, there's actually more available people. I'm not sure. I think it's a little too early, Mike, to say that they're going to the right. I think they're actually going to the center. They've been quite left,
right from where they are.
In a rightish type direction, perhaps.
Right light.
So, but the thing is that, you know, whenever we do polling, most Canadians are in the center. You know, even though things are very polarized and people have opinions about everything, you know, when we ask Canadians to put themselves on a 10-point scale, majority score themselves a 4, 5, or 6. So, you know, the Liberals are moving to the center. The big question is, can the Conservatives move just a little bit to the center? They don't need to abandon the right because that's their strength. But can they move a little bit to the center so that they can improve their likelihood of picking up votes, especially the people who were with them? And, you know, the good news for the Conservatives, if they're at 47% once, that doesn't mean that they can go back and regain some of those people, depending on Pierre Poilievre's performance during the election campaign and Mark Carney's performance during the election campaign.
Nick Nanos describes Canadians most likely at a 5, but you know what? Anytime you're on this show, you're a 10, Nick. I really appreciate it. Nick Nanos from Nanos Research, just a love fest here. Thanks so much for joining us.